So it's important to know what Medicaid is. So Medicaid is different than Medicare, right? Medicaid is a need-based, basically welfare program. That's what it's entitled. That's what it really is. It's a need-based welfare program. So in order to qualify for Medicaid, every state kind of has a regime that they had to put together a Medicaid program for the federal government. And so in most states, what you have to do is you have to meet two tests in order to qualify for Medicaid. You have to meet an asset test and you have to meet an income test. So your assets have to be below a certain level and your income has to be below a certain level. And if you fail either test, then you're disqualified from Medicaid. Medicaid will pay for long-term care, which is different than what Medicare does. Now, when you look at the assets and the income test, every state is going to be slightly different, right? Because, incomes in Texas look a lot different than incomes in California.
Right. Incomes
in Mississippi are very different than incomes in New York City, right? So each state kind of set up a test. So generally in Texas, what you're looking at from an asset test is for an individual to qualify for Medicaid, they've got to have countable assets of less than $2,000. And so the question is, what's a countable asset versus a non-countable asset? Basically, the non-countable assets, the one that they're going to exclude from the calculation, is your home, your car, and a prepaid funeral plan. So those are the assets that you can exclude, but everything else is generally going to be counted. Now there is what's called spousal impoverishment, and so with spousal impoverishment, basically even if you're married and you apply and only you're applying, you still have to list the assets for your spouse, and so they'll let your spouse keep more money so that they don't have to be impoverished in order for you to get care. And right now that impoverishment figure in Texas is about $116,000. The income test looks at what is your monthly income, what's coming in. It counts Social Security, it counts any distributions that you're getting from your retirement accounts. If you got rental property, it counts the income from your rental property, whatever comes in on income. In most states, and Texas is included in this, if your client only has Social Security and that's really the only form of income that they have, they're generally going to qualify under the income test. And so, like I said, you got to pass both tests. If you pass both tests, you can qualify for Medicaid. If you fail either test, then no Medicaid for you.
Well, then that brings up the question, what happens if you fail, let's say, the asset test?
So if you fail the asset test, generally what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to spend your assets down to the point where you qualify. So we talked about, you'd be hitting that retirement account to the point where you got down under your asset values in order to qualify. One of the ways that people often will try to qualify because they have not talked to an attorney about this is they will give stuff away.
Right.
Giving stuff away doesn't work. So generally what's going to happen when you make a Medicaid application, Medicaid is going to circle that date on the calendar.
Right.
And that's going to be the start date. And they apply what's called a look back period. And so they're going to look back at your financial transactions over the last 60 months, the last 5 years. And they're going to see what you did over that 5-year time period to see if you tried to get on Medicaid. So let's take an example. So you had $300,000, you gave it to your daughter, and then you applied for Medicaid the next day. When you list that on the application, you better list it on the application because it's a criminal offense to lie on a federal application, right? But you list it on the application, you say, well, I gave away $300,000 and I did it yesterday. Guess what? You're not going to pass Medicaid. What they do is they will either fail you for under the asset test, or they will give you a period of ineligibility. And so they'll say, well, you meet the asset test, but you made these gifts during the look-back period, and those are monies you could have spent on your care. And so we're going to calculate what your care costs on a per-day basis, and we're going to divide it into the $300,000 that you gave away to your daughter, and we're going to come out with how many days you are ineligible. So in that example, let's say that care costs you $300 a day. You gave away $300,000. They divide it out. You were 1,000 days not eligible for Medicaid. Now here's the problem with that, right? How are you going to pay for the long-term care now? Because you're ineligible for 3 years, right?
Right.
Well, you better hope that your daughter steps in because she got your $300,000.
Right.
Right.
She doesn't even have to stay there anymore. She can be in another country with that money if she wants to be.
She moved to Bora Bora,
Right.
and she's drinking Mai Tais, and you're trying to figure out how to make ends meet during your 1,000 days that you're ineligible.
Exactly.
So it's a big problem. Lots of people try to sort of game the system with gifting, and it doesn't work too well. Now, if one of the things that you'll often see, or that I see, I've got a client right now that mom gave away, deeded over a property 4.5 years ago, and mom's now needing long-term care. They're thinking about applying for Medicaid. So I looked at the Medicaid application. They sent it to my office. I checked it over, and I noticed, hey, we're taping this in March. In May is when the gift was made. So I just told the family, well, just wait and apply after
Right.
that May date. And then it doesn't have to be listed on the application anymore. You're not doing anything wrong because you're answering honestly about when those things occurred. And it's not going to raise the red flag
Right.
or cause a period of ineligibility. So a lot of times, if you think you're going to fail the asset test, especially for gifts that you made a while ago, what you're going to want to do is maybe pay for a few months of care, and then, or have the kids pay for a few months of care, and then you apply after that kind of gift was made.
Right.
So that's one way you can do it. If you plan in advance, you can also plan to, if you think you're going to need long-term care at some point in the future, you can actually use an irrevocable trust to transfer assets from you to the trust with the idea that eventually you'll qualify for Medicaid.
Right.
And so that can also be a method that you use to kind of plan in advance for long-term care.
What about the income test, if you fail that?
So if you fail the income test, there's a little type of trust called a qualified income trust, but it's referred to as a Miller trust. And what the Miller trust does is it reduces your income for purposes of qualifying you for Medicaid. That's the whole point of the trust. And so what you do is you set up this irrevocable trust. Somebody else is the trustee of it, and usually it's an adult child, and you take all of, let's say, mom's income, and as it comes into her bank account, you transfer it all over to the trust bank account, and the trust, she'll qualify for Medicaid. Medicaid will decide how much of that income, usually it's all of it, gets used, but Medicaid will fill the gap. So what Medicaid will do is it'll say, okay, well, your cost of care is $5,000 a month. You're bringing in $3,000 a month. And so what we're going to do is we'll pay the $2,000 a month, and then you pay the nursing home the $3,000 a month that's in the Miller Trust.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be a huge benefit to families. So we did one a couple of weeks ago, and the reason we did it is there's a a daughter who approached me and she said, Mom needs long-term care, but Mom literally, her income was $217 a month too high. Now, when you think about what incomes that we're talking about, she has care that requires, that's basically a $5,000 a month facility. It's like $4,800 a month. So she's $217 too high, so she doesn't qualify, right? But she qualifies under the asset test, so she's only failing under the income test. Well, Mom has no way to make up the difference.
Right.
I mean, she needs long-term care. She can't go get a job to make up the difference. I mean, there's no vehicle for her to be able to pay for her care. So who's paying for her care? Her daughter, right?
Right.
So it falls on her daughter to pay the difference right now. Well, here's the problem. So daughter and son-in-law work. They have 2 kids in college. Until she went into long-term care, Mom was actually living with them. Well, they have a 3rd child, and that child has Down syndrome.
Oh, good grief.
So can you imagine the financial burden for them to pick up a $4,000 a month additional expense? They already have 2 kids in college. They have one that has a 3rd child that has extra needs that are over and above what a normal child would have, right? So, and they're both already working. So they're making ends meet. They're doing everything they can possibly do. So when you look at the Miller Trust, it's really about relieving that burden off of the family members and shifting that burden back onto public assistance, because I mean, in this case, it's just killing the family.
Right.
And it's killing the family finances, and it threatens the ability for them to continue on with paying for college and all of their financial life. So the important thing for you to know is there are methods. If your client, I think the important thing to know is, number one, you should be advising your clients about long-term care insurance.
Absolutely.
And what the tremendous need is. You should be advising your clients about saving for long-term care and for retirement at the same time. But you should also notice for those clients, particularly adult children who have elderly parents, you should be aware that if there's some reason that they can't qualify for Medicaid and their parent does not have a plan for how to pay for the long-term care, there are methods that are available to them, either through advanced trust planning or through the Miller Trust, that can help them qualify for Medicaid so that it relieves your client of that planning burden and from the expense burden of long-term care.
One thing I want to add to that too, from a CFP standpoint, is if you do a plan for a client, you better add long-term care insurance into that plan as an option for that client. And if that client decides not to get long-term care, you better have that well documented in terms of why they decided not to do that. And that's to protect you.